Let's take a look at how to build a simple integration with Sage 1, and specifically we're going to import account information into Sage 1. So first of all, I'm going to pull information out of a SQL database, where then I'm going to transform that and use that to generate account data inside Sage 1. So let's start by adding a SQL query. This allows us to query a Microsoft SQL database. You'll need to choose a connection. I have one set up on my personal machine, and we can just drill into the detail of that connection to see how that is structured. I've specified a server name, which is my local computer. Flowgear is able to connect into that by virtue of the fact that I'm using a drop point, which is installed on the same computer. I've then specified a database name and some credentials, and if I hit the play button, I can verify that that connection is testing successfully. So we can go back to the workflow design, and in the query property, I'll click that and just put in a simple query to query some contact information. And to test that that's working correctly, I'll click on Run this node. So that executes the simple query, and if I scroll across to the result XML, I can see a tabular representation of the first two rows of data that we pulled out. If you click on the Value tab, you can see the underlying XML that was actually returned. Now I'm going to click the Airlift button, and what that's going to do is take this sample information that I've got here and pull that onto the design. So you can see it's now set that value onto the result field, and we're going to need that in a moment when we start to map data. Now we can have a look at Sage 1. So I'm going to add the Sage 1 connector. And again, the first thing I'll need to do is set up a connection for it. I already have one, but we'll have a look at how that detail is composed. Click on the Edit button over there. And this is what the Sage 1 connection looks like. It's not necessary to use a drop point because Sage 1 is itself a cloud service. Provide your credentials in the form of your username and password over here, and then you're going to need the company ID. Now, not all of the interactions that you perform on Sage 1 require a company ID, but most of them do. For example, anything relating to customers or orders or procurement or inventory or pricing, that's going to need a company ID. It's a little difficult to find the company ID, but here's the easiest way. Sign into Sage 1. Click on the company menu option and go to Open and Manage Companies. Then if you hover over the company that you're interested in our case Flowgear, you can see the tooltip that appears in the bottom left corner of the screen where that number is presented. In our case it's 161695 for this demo company, and that is the number that appears down in the bottom section over here that you need to copy into the connection details. Once you pop that in, you can verify the connection by clicking the play button. Back on our design canvas, we can now look at how to map the data across, and we need to tell Flowgear that we're intending to create a customer save operation. So click on the settings cog over here, click on choose sample, and let's just filter for the customer templates or samples that are available to us. I'm particularly interested in one called post customer that allows us to save a customer. What that will do is provide structural information about that query, so we can see what the structure of a customer create record looks like. We're seeing some example XML data over there, and on the right hand side is a tree view that shows the hierarchy. And by ticking and unticking these selections here, the sample information on the left hand side will be updated accordingly. But what we want to do in our case now is map from SQL to Sage. So Flowgear can see what our source data looks like. We've got some sample information sitting in the result XML property, and it can see what our target structure looks like because we've just loaded a sample for the target. So now in the middle we need to put in what we call quick map, which is our visual data mapper, and that needs to be able to see the source and the target. So drag a data flow connector from result XML to source XML, and then another one from transformed XML to request XML. Then you can click on the mapping XML property and you can visually map this data across. So we have a company name that will map to the name. We have a phone somewhere down over here. Let's map that to mobile, and let's map through the email address. And finally let's do a contact name. We also just need to show it how to construct a single row. So one table element is actually a row on the left hand side, and that becomes the root of the document on the right hand side. Now there's just one more step. We've pulled multiple records out of our SQL database on the left-hand side over here, but the Sage 1 connector, like many APIs, only allows us to save one document at a time. So we actually need to split these records out into individual records and then push individual customer creation requests into Sage 1. So to do that, you're going to add an element called a splitter. And this, as the name suggests, allows us to take a document and split it into multiple sections. So wire it through like this. You want to wire the data through the source document property here. Then you want to take the split document and wire that through there. Then you can hook all of the execution flows along the top so that Flogia knows what sequence to process in. And what's going to happen is for every document that the splitter encounters, it's going to fire the split output that you see here, and then run quick map and Sage 1, and again for the second customer, quick map and Sage 1. And that's how the integration holds together. The final thing that we need to do is tell the splitter how to identify a single row of data. So if you refer back to the SQL data that we have sitting over here, if you look at the XML structure, the XPath is result/table. So I'm going to use that XPath over here. That will identify a single row of data, and then there's an encapsulation option that tells us how to wrap information around the row that we've selected. There is a more technical explanation of how the encapsulation options work on the help article for the splitter, which may be of interest to you. So to access that, click on the settings cog and just choose help over here. But we're now ready to execute this workflow. So hit the play button. As you can see, the splitter has been invoked over here. Where we have two documents coming in, we've got a single document coming out. So again, we're looking at a tabular representation of the data. And if we drill into the value view, this is giving us an XML representation of that same data. Then if we go to the Sage 1 request, the quick map call has translated that data for us. The request information going into Sage 1 looks like that. Again, this is just a tabular representation of the underlying XML data. And the response data is coming back out of Sage 1, and this signals that the customer has been created successfully, and in fact that's the internal customer ID that it just created. And again, if you prefer, refer to the original XML document, which is showing that same customer ID over there. And that is how you create a simple Sage 1 customer integration.